Hi guys, I'm just another guy named James, and today I'm going to be talking about the next set of G.I. Joe issues. These issues were released in 1990, and they kind of run a gambit of a few different storylines that are going on. And it's an interesting era of G.I. Joe. It's a really odd era, I think. These issues are, like most in the series, are written by Larry Hama. In this particular era, they're drawn by Mark Bright. I think Mark Bright does a really good job with the art chores on these issues, but there's just something about the storylines that are being undergone in this era of G.I. Joe. There's something that they're kind of missing. And what they're missing is stakes, kind of. It's weird. It's a really odd era for the G.I. Joe comic because in some ways it's not too bad issue to issue, but looking at each story as a whole, it's kind of, the stories tend to be just very underwhelming. So I think the stories I'm talking about today are a prime example of this. But before we get hopped straight into the future, let's just take a minute and recap. So in the G.I. Joe comic at this time, Cobra Commander has just returned from the dead and has retaken command of Cobra, and so today we're kind of reading about his first plot as Cobra Commander, and it's kind of interesting. It's all right, and it's a very okay era for the comic. There are a lot of characters that kind of just come and go throughout these stories. Let's see. One important name to be aware of is the October Guard. The October Guard was created from the very beginning of the G.I. Joe comic. They were in issues 6 and 7 of the G.I. Joe comic, and the October Guard is basically the Russian equivalent to the G.I. Joe team. The team that you're going to see in these issues is a slightly different October Guard because the October Guard that we are most familiar with, half of them were killed in an issue of G.I. Joe Special Missions. But overall, so the October Guard, the G.I. Joe team, and Cobra Commander are kind of your front runners today. And there's all sorts of stuff that kind of just happens in these stories, happens with very little to no explanation, and it's just kind of a funky little story, little era. It's not bad. It's not bad, but I also would struggle to say that it's good. But honestly, I think that's all the background that should be needed. Written by Larry Hama, drawn by Mark Bright on all of these issues, I believe. We'll say with confidence that Bright drew all of these issues. So let's just hop straight into our story, which today opens on Mutt and Spirit, two members of the G.I. Joe team, as they get off a bus and head for Mutt's uncle Jeff's house in a town called Millville. Once they arrive, we see that the town is very downtrodden since the steel mill closed down, putting an end to most of the industry in town. We then cut away to Broca Beach, where Cobra Commander decides that he is going to orchestrate a takeover of the town of Millville. So as Cobra Commander touches down in Millville, promising a return to industry for the beleaguered town, all while showing off some military prowess, Cobra also cuts all the telephone lines into town and hostilely takes over the police station, before setting up a bunch of Crimson Guardsmen to replace all of the real cops, and taking over the town, closing off the roads and rounding up all the citizens. Meanwhile, Mutt, Junkyard, and Spirit try to lay low and try to find a way to communicate out to Joe headquarters. but they're unable to. In the center of town, we see that an army veteran is standing up to Cobra, but the rest of the town seems to be going along with the plan, even going into a trailer to get ID cards from Cobra, and the vet is separated from the rest of the group. Mutt and Spirit are unable to reach out to headquarters because of Cobra plane running electronic countermeasures. So out in the town center, we see that Uncle Jeff is talking a little too much, and he accidentally rats out that Mutt is in town before he is forced into the trailer and into a version of the brainwave scanner created by Dr. Venom. Later that night, we see Mutt trick a squad of Vipers into stopping and looking at him before he attacks them with a bottle, while Spirit and Junkyard also take down parts of the crew, with Spirit even taking down the driver of the HISS tank. In the back, they find the vet from earlier, and they rescue him before they decide they're going to free the town. But first, they want to find Jeff. But when they get to Uncle Jeff's house, he snitches on them, having set a trap for the Joes. Mutt and Spirit are then marched out at gunpoint before Junkyard runs by and attacks one of the Vipers. So Mutt and Spirit start busting heads, and they pick up weapons so they can fight off the next wave of Vipers. But before they get the chance, Russ, the veteran, guns down the Vipers from the captured HISS tank before they make their escape. But they're being pursued, so they bail from the tank, allowing it to be destroyed so that they can resume stealth operations. We then cut into the pit, which is Joe headquarters, where Flint, Roadblock, Lady J, and Muskrat are told that they're being sent on a covert, ultra-sensitive mission, and that they're being picked up by plane, and that they will receive additional details en route. The Joes then ride on the Desert Fox into the plane, and once it's clapped down, the Joes go and meet their partners on the mission, the October Guard, who are missing a few members as they died and been replaced. Back in Millville, we see that Russ has brought Spirit and Mutt to a group of troubled, rebellious, kind of like gang teens, who Russ worked with as a social worker. And Russ thinks that the teens will help them attack Cobra headquarters, which is the police station. Over the country of Sierra Gordo, we see the Joes have read their marching orders, which are basically to work with the October Guard and to help a rebel coalition of the country hoist control of the country away from Cobra. But before they are able to make a nice peaceful landing, the plane is struck by a surface-to-air missile and begins crashing. But it's going to make it to the runway. So Darklon, one of Destro's cronies and current king of Sierra Gordo, or like current like military dictator of Sierra Gordo, has a team of demon tanks and Razorback tanks go to the airstrip. But the Joes and the October Guard hop off in their vehicles, and they drive off into the woods with Darklon hot on their trail. Darklon pursues the Joes and the October Guard into the woods, and soon one of the Razorbacks gets a shot off and decommissions the October Guard's vehicle. But after some pushing from the rest of his team, Flint goes back and picks up the Russians. But they aren't out of the fire yet, as they are still being chased, until Flint makes a jump over a ravine where the Razorback and the demons can't follow. But they have entered a Takaro, which is like the indigenous hunting tribe of this area, a Takaro rainforest. Meanwhile, in Millville, we see that Mutt, Spirit, and Russ have been at work as they've destroyed the HISS tank lot, commandeered weapons, and taken down the brainwave scanner trailers. We then cut away to a group of teens who are leading a Cobra bug down an alley where a safe is dropped on it. And Mutt and Spirit lead a team to strip the tank of all useful equipment before they go back into the shadows. So they're just doing guerrilla warfare. Back in Sierra Gordo, we see that the Takaros have surrounded the Joes and the October Guard, but Roadblock is able to pull their fat out of the fryer, but by mentioning that they're friends of Rakondo's. Rakondo is a Joe who had lived with the Takaros for a few years, and he had also gotten very close to them around the time of the first adventure on Cobra Island. That's going to be linked in the description. And the Takaros agree to help the Joes because of that connection. But it doesn't take long for Cobra to use some of their superior tech to start pressing into the forest, including bombing runs, which have resulted in several Takaro casualties. And the Joes and the guard of the Takaros are basically in formation in marching formation with Roadblock and Misha, the heavy weapon specialists, in the back of the caravan. And even as the bombing ends, the Cobra sends their tanks rolling in. But the Joes and the October Guard are almost home free because they have to make it through one final pass, and they're inserted into like sacred Takaro land that would be like illegal to go into, I guess, or it would be so hard to go into with the tanks that it'd be not worth it. And at the back of the line, Roadblock and Misha are able to take down a couple of tanks, but they are soon injured, with Roadblock going temporarily blind and Misha having his legs injured. So Roadblock picks up Misha and they leg it back to the main group. In Millville, we see Smut and Spirit going on one last attack for the steel mill, but when they arrive, everything is normal, and Hawk rolls up on them, and he gets kind of out of nowhere, and he wants to know why they've been doing the things that they've been doing, why they've been doing this illegal guerrilla warfare, and Mutt and Spirit actually get arrested here. And as a final note for Millville, after Mutt and Hawk and Spirit all leave, we see Cobra Commander call the steel mill and activate the entirety of the town as sleeper agents. And in Sierra Gorda, we see that the rainforest that the Joes were banking on making it to has been chopped down, so they're left out in the open. We then see that somehow another team of Joes has learned the location of Flint and his team, so Wild Bill moves in the Locust helicopter and flies around and provides some air support until his helicopter is swatted and he gets picked up by Flint. We then see another G.I. Joe vehicle, the Raider, is deployed by train and starts taking down Razorbacks, until all the Joes meet up and they plan to cross the now deforested forest to get out of the country. But the Takaros are unwilling to go out with them, so they take a shaped charge and they go their separate ways. As the Joes drive into the small ravines in the area, they are able to keep the Razorbacks at bay. And we also see the Takaros hop on and commandeer a Razorback. The chase continues with the Joes driving into dried out riverbeds and using some pretty goofy hydraulic like extenders to take down enemy tanks until they're out of ammo and missiles, leaving Darklon to re-enter the fray until his tank is taken down by the Takaros, who also take Darklon as their prisoner, and the Joes and the October Guard are kind of just able to drive out of the country. And that's where our stories end. And this is kind of what I mean by both of these stories just fall flat. They kind of just end out of nowhere. Mutt and Spirit's story in Millville is dumb, straight up. You know, what does Cobra Commander want with this town? We don't know. Does the town ever come up again? I honestly don't remember if it does, but my instinct is to say that it does not. The town of Millville is kind of just this weird... It's this really odd thing, and it's such a poor thing to have Cobra Commander's return be him just kind of taking over this random town, and that if it weren't for the Joes who just so happen to be there, wouldn't even be like a notable thing that happens, because it would have been so easy for him without Mutt and Spirit being there. It's just very odd. This is the third time we see the Joes go to the country of Sierra Gordo. and it's just weird. Focusing in on the Flint and Roadblock and Lady J story. This is the third time we see the Joes go to the country of Cerro Gordo. The first time being in the 30 Strikes for Snake Eyes story. The second time being right before the raising of Cobra Island. And this is now the third time. And it's weird because it doesn't matter that it doesn't actually matter that the story takes place in Cerro Gordo. Because nothing about the story actually matters. The opening action is that the Joes and the October Guard have been deployed to restabilize the country and like help out some rebels. I don't know if you noticed, we never see the rebels in this story, and it's kind of just implied that Cobra wiped them out. But Flint just makes a line in passing about how the rebels hung them out to dry. It's really unclear what happened, and it's just such an odd storytelling technique. To have two stories going on simultaneously, and have them both be these like weird, empty, meaningless things. And it's just bizarre. It's just kind of a bizarre era for the G.I. Joe comic, because a lot of these stories start like this, where they start off having really interesting concepts, where they start off having these really kind of cool ideas going on, and then you get to then you read the last part of the adventure, and it's like, oh wait, so Cobra kind of just won, and that's been a storytelling element that's been going on for the last 50 issues at this point. The raising of Cobra Island really was probably the first story to do that, but it since it was the first, it didn't feel as tropey yet, and now it kind of it feels like a thing of the Joes aren't allowed to win in their own comic, and it's a little frustrating. And the Joes are also, the longer the comic goes on, the less effective they become. Because at the beginning, you get the idea that the Joes are this, like, ultra independent, like, army force. And then you get to these issues, and they're kind of just either lucking their way out of situations, like they are in Cerro Gordo. They technically accomplish the mission because Darklon gets captured, but the Joes don't actually accomplish that, and the Joes and the October Guard are just trying to escape. And I think it would have been more interesting if we had gotten just a little bit more of like the Joes standing their ground and trying to complete the mission, and less of them just trying to get out of the country. It is in that specific side of the story. And then for Mutt and Spirit and in Millville, Hawk kind of just comes out of nowhere, and he's like, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" And then once they explain what they're doing, Hawk should believe them a little bit more than he does. The last story that happened was Rock and Roll and Clutch were brainwashed and sent loose into the pit, and they almost killed these two like innocent civilians. Hawk should be aware that mind control is a thing that happens in the G.I. Joe universe, and therefore he should believe two of his men that are telling him that that's what's going on in the town. But Hawk just kind of doesn't believe them, and he low-key arrests them at the end of that part of the story. And it's like, what is going on here? Why are we doing that? And it's just this whole era is kind of just an odd one for G.I. Joe. I think the artwork's really good. I think Mark Bright kind of revitalized the artwork of G.I. Joe after it had been kind of ransacked by like Tony Salmons and a couple of those other guys that were drawing the comic in the for issues like 70 through 90. I think the artwork on a lot of those issues is pretty rough. But yeah, Mark Bright does a good job with the artwork. It's just the stories are a little. They're simultaneously too long and too short, and they very often lack proper conclusions, and it's kind of just frustrating because if it was just a one-time thing, it would be one thing. But as you'll see over the next few videos on G.I. Joe, and as you've probably seen over the last few videos on G.I. Joe, it's not a one-time problem. We've kind of been dealing with this for a while now, I would say for at least 10, maybe 15 issues, where the stories that are going on just don't really have conclusions. And it's definitely a compounding problem, where the more it happens, the more annoying it gets. But overall, I would say these issues they're not bad, like, especially individually. Individually, I think they're all pretty decent. But, like, looking at them as a collective, they don't hold up very well. Straight up. Like the October Guard coming back. By the way, one last note. They bring back the October Guard for these stories. Why? The October Guard doesn't do anything. They don't, like, in the first story with them, the October Guard's purpose was to be like this perfect counter to the G.I. Joe team. There were these, like, antagonists that were equally as skilled as the Joes, and they end up working together against Cobra because that's kind of the only option that they're left with. But they both know that they're going to betray each other, and the Joes kind of just outsmart them. It's a very interesting dynamic in that first story, but in that second one, they could have the October Guard could have just as easily been replaced by random unnamed Joes, and nothing about it would change except for, like, one line in the middle where Flint considers leaving the October Guard for dead. And it's just such an odd decision to make. I don't know. It's like bringing back the October Guard for this issue definitely just felt like the team was trying to recapture the feeling of the first few issues of the comic. Which actually, I 100% think that's what's going on. Because you have Cobra Commander returning and being this, like, overwhelming threat. You have the October Guard coming back. You have the brainwave scanner, which was a concept introduced, again, in those early couple of eras of G.I. Joe. You have the brainwave scanner coming back. You have the country of Sierra Gordo coming back. But not mattering. But it doesn't really matter that it's Sierra Gordo, because none of these characters, except for Roadblock, have been to the country before. If it had been Stalker in this story, or Gung Ho, or Torpedo, or Breaker, or any of those characters who were actually there in Sierra Gordo for the first couple of stories, or Rakondo. If it was Rakondo, shoot, that would have been cool. I think they should have had Rakondo in this story instead of Muskrat. I think that would have been really interesting. But they just don't really do that. It's kind of it in a lot of ways it feels like the comics trying to be nostalgic for its own beginnings and pushing towards, like, these newer comics, all while being embarrassed about the fact that it's a comic book. Because you're losing a lot of the comic book feel that the G.I. Joe series had for the first 53 issues. There were a lot of high comic book concepts in those early issues, written really well and executed on very well, and you're kind of losing that. You're getting more quasi-realistic. You're getting like more quasi-realistic stories where like, oh, it's you got these unclear winners and losers, and like you're missing the forest for the trees at this point in the G.I. Joe comic, is what I would say. But overall, I don't know. It's not a bad era. It's not the worst era of the G.I. Joe comic, but it certainly is far from the best. I do think it's still kind of worth. I think you could find enjoyment in reading these. I wouldn't be shocked if people liked these comics. They're not terrible, but I definitely think there's more bad than good here, and unfortunately, that's kind of an anthem we're going to be hearing for the rest of the G.I. Joe series from here on out. But yeah, overall, that's all I've got today. So I'm just another guy named James, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.